Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched State Fair from 1945. Now, this is a movie I had never heard of, didn't know anything about prior to watching it, but it came up in conversation because I was talking with some friends about it's July, August. It's fair season in the U.S. This is a common thing in lots of different parts of the United States. The idea of county and state fairs, and county and state fairs are a weird thing to me. I'm going to immediately go on a tangent in this video. Apologies. You came here for it. Deal with it. Fairs are a weird thing in current year. The idea of a state fair or a county fair in a historical sense in the United States was sort of a community gathering for especially for people who lived in more rural parts of the states, to gather and see what the state is capable of and like celebrate what the residents of a state were producing, what they're like, especially for people who worked the land in various capacities, whether they're farmers or ranchers or whatever else. And it's continued into the current day in a limited and kind of strange way. While like historically there was more of a focus on the sort of like this pastoral life kind of thing, obviously with the technological progress that we have had over the last 150 years, and the changes to how we work the land that we have in this country. I can't speak to how this works in anywhere else, so I'm just talking in generalizations about the United States. The idea of a state fair has become more and more about sort of like the carnival food. Like it's a phrase I like to use a lot, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but if you take it that way, I apologize. It's carny shit. It is very much like focused on the more carnival aspects of it. It's the rides, it's the food, it's the spectacles. That is more often than not more the focus of fairs these days. It depends where you are. And I've been to some fairs that are much more carny and some that are much more pastoral. So it depends. But in current times, it's an interesting sort of, it's both a time capsule of something that was more common in a prior era of the United States, but it's also interesting to see the way that it has adapted and some of the ways that it hasn't, because like in when I talk about carny shit, I don't mean it in a derogatory way. It goes both ways, because like carnivals and carnies and the idea of like a traveling circus and those sorts of things are a fascinating cultural artifact in their own, not unique to the United States, in terms of like nomadic people and shows put on by shows and attractions put on by people who are typically displaced from living in a like having a nomadic life rather than a traditional sedentary living in one place sort of life. And so it's interesting to see how that has been commodified, adapted, exploited even further, and also regulated in other ways. So like you have carnivals these days and fairs where like they're like the commodification of certain things. The idea of going to a fair and spending a little bit of money for like a lot of entertainment is no longer so much the thing. It is not as affordable as it once was. It has become a thing that is like kind of expensive to go have a whole day at a fair. It's an interesting thing to me. But I've digressed enough. Don't worry, I'll do it again. State Fair is really interesting because it is this movie is sort of a time capsule of a time and place that is idealized, but also like deeply earnest and honest about a time and place. It's set in Iowa, and actually, this was even weirder to find out since I've never heard of this before. This is a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical that is based on a 1933 movie, which is based on a 1932 novel. And in fact, after this movie, it was adapted like 3 or 4 more times in the last, since then. And that's just fascinating to me in the sense that I've never heard of it before. Also, because it's simultaneously a time capsule and also kind of timeless in the sort of things that it's trying to address, I'm kind of curious what some of these other ones look like, to the point that actually the 1933 movie is apparently in the Library of Congress as a culturally significant movie. It's just interesting history I didn't know. And obviously, for those who know much of anything about musical theater and musical cinema, Rodgers and Hammerstein are some of the most famous names in that genre in terms of their team writing of scripts and music and lyrics, and like are on a short list of sort of musical big names over the last 100 years. So watching this movie is, I don't want to be down on it because I actually quite like a lot about this, but it's a mixed bag because obviously being set in the 30s and or originally written in the 30s at least and produced in the 40s, especially like right near it's being produced right towards the end of of World War II, which is sort of a period is about to be a new period of cultural change in the United States. There are a lot of attitudes, cultural and social attitudes that are really interesting to look at in this film, for me at least. It's the thing that always sticks out to me in a lot of things that are of a certain age. But I think especially because this movie thematically is about timeless, like, human connection, but also is but those things are very contingent upon the social dynamics, especially between men and women. And when they are also couched in a more rural view and a rural idea of the United States, this more pastoral lifestyle with less cultural exposure to the world at large. It's not a story about living in cities and being exposed to as much diversity of thought or experience. And so the novelty of going to a state fair is and like seeing what other people are doing in the state is a fascinating attitude on its own to unpack. In addition, because so much of this film is really about it is a comedy romance, I would say, and because it follows a variety of different romantic partners during like different parts of their relationships, I think that's also really interesting to unpack, especially given the time and place this was made, and the attitudes, especially towards women's places. In some ways, this is a shockingly progressive film, at least for the time. Let's clarify that. In terms of showing a variety of different women of substantial independence who are not constantly being hounded by men to behave in a certain way or to not do things. It is fairly liberal in that sense, in terms even for these relatively rural people, towards just sort of being like, yeah, everybody does what they want to, everybody pitches in, as long as everybody gets their stuff done, men and women are treated with I'm not going to say equal attitudes, but given a lot of other things that were released during this era, The sort of it's weird to compliment a movie for not abusing women, but that's something that I think needs to be pointed out. This easily could have delved into a place of sort of showing off for whatever reason, writing reason, showing women being repressed by male figures in their lives, whether that's spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, uh, siblings, other people of authority, and it, rather than doing any of that, it presents a very earnest, if admittedly very idealized, version of sort of the novelty of going to a fair and meeting new people and having new experiences and having a genuine want for like emotional experiences and learning more about the world. And it's interesting to see, even in subtle ways, how it presents a couple of these different relationships as they grow, change, fall apart, are rebuilt. And I'm not going to give it too much compliment in terms of like being drastically complex or showing, anything really exemplary. But it's very, like, it is very, very earnest. And I appreciate that about it more than pretty much anything else. It brushes over things sometimes, and it definitely has some problematic attitudes throughout the film about various people's places and what they should and shouldn't be doing or expecting of other people, or those sorts of things. Some questionable things that are said to various people, but it's presented with such earnestness, and the lessons that are learned by various characters in terms of who to trust, how to behave, what to believe in, who you should, what attitudes you should have about the world at large, are never at any point sort of shoved down your throat, but are explored in sort of these subtle ways. They're never like directly, it's never directly done. It's more just like, hey, here's a couple of these like little things about these people, and then there's how these people interact with each other. What is their life like based on these couple of things we know about them? What are the expectations they have based on what we just saw about them earlier, and how are those expectations being either reinforced or upset by the experiences they're having in this new place, in a unique experience where they're being exposed to, I'm not going to say diversity because it's very undiverse, unsurprisingly, but like the idea of having character exploration, and I'm sure I could ramble on about that for a continuing period, but it's just it's very sort of earnest, and it wants to, like, it while it is, how do I say this? It is idealistic without being delusional, I would say. It talks very honestly about breakdowns in people's relationships and problems that people can have as a result of expecting the wrong things out of other people. But it also like paints a very idyllic picture of Americana, of this like traditional, borderline propagandistic idea of what what America is like, what the American dream is, what it is like to live in the center of America, in the Midwest. And there are some aspects of this that are like deeply Midwestern, which I find fascinating on its own. And so the whole thing is like, it's this unique capsule of ideas and times with some like sometimes questionable historical attitudes, but like an earnestness that makes it genuinely compelling throughout, even when things are uncomfortable. As far as being a musical, I don't think it's super extraordinary, but I'm not the biggest Rodgers and Hammerstein fan either. I think they make good stuff, but like they're usually not the ones to make my absolute favorites. And there are some songs I could probably call out in this film, but none of them stick out to me like as really extraordinary, really compelling. None of them get super stuck in my head past a little ways after watching it, in the way that some of my truly favorite musicals do. But they're all completely competent. As far as the acting and singing, I think there's pretty good job all around. I think, like I said, having a surprisingly decent balance of men and women in relationships that don't seem controlling or adversarial or like particularly toxic in a historical way. That the way that the characters play off each other, their conduct, and the writing done to present them in positive, in constructive ways, as well as the acting done to portray those characters, all synergizes really well to something that is, again, not super extraordinary in any way, but like works really well and is good, solid entertainment. I could nitpick individual elements of this and talk about how like there are certain things where it's the music seems a little shoehorned now and then, or other things like that. It did actually bring one particular thing to mind which kind of cracked me up, and I had never even considered before, which is the idea that like there's and only came sort of out of the historical context of this, the idea that like, hold on a second, are a bunch of these fair rides only designed the way they're designed so that like men and women who are not married to each other yet can get on a ride together and be tossed around so they have an excuse, like a culturally acceptable excuse to like touch each other and rub up against each other, not in like a super sexualized way, but just like oh, ha, we, had more physical contact than is typically culturally acceptable for this time. And it's something I never considered before, but like genuinely believe must have been a consideration, at least for a few of those things. Kind of amusing, something that will probably stick with me forever now. And it's a pretty good looking film too. Like 1945 is far enough into the color movie era that like I'm not going to say it's particularly extraordinary for a Technicolor film, but the sets and lighting and color all come together in a really pleasant way to give this, to really emphasize the sort of that colorful, fair Americana kind of thing going on. I think it all is composed really well, and there's some great costumes that are like not really glaringly costumes, but just they dress the characters really well, and I appreciate that, especially for something where they could have just been wearing the same clothes the whole time and they don't. Anyway, I'm digressing away from, I was gonna say the point, but I'm not sure what my point is. It's a pretty good film, and it's probably not going to stick with me anything like some of my favorite musicals or other movies from this era, but I think it probably deserves a little more recognition than it's probably gotten. Tell me if you've ever heard of this film before, and if you do like movie musicals from this era, check it out. This one's straight up just on YouTube as a free full movie. I assume it's probably dropped out of copyright at this point, and that's why it's up there. But you can watch it for free. It's like an hour and a half. It's a really easy watch, and it's really not bad at all. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been your host, the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.